Welcome back to another episode of Barbecue and Bottles, and today we're going to be doing a brisket experiment. We're going to be smoking both of these guys on the pellet grill. One of them will be fat cap up, the other will have the fat cap pointed down, and we'll see which one has the better flavor profile, which one's more moist, more juicy, and we'll just overall grade them across a bunch of dimensions for you. So if you've been with us here on the channel for a while, you've seen us do a bunch of steak experiment videos where we've been putting a certain myth to the test to see whether that's actually an essential part of getting a perfect steak seared on cast iron or in a pizza oven or on the grill. So we thought we'd transition that series here to brisket. So if you're into that kind of thing, stick around. So as we were editing these videos, we realized just how long these brisket videos take. And we realized some of you might actually want to just skip to the finish and see the conclusions. So we've got this table of contents right here with some timestamps. So if you're one of those people that doesn't want to watch the full video, here you go. We've got two briskets here. Each of these are about 10 pounds. And they're the equivalent of a USDA prime, which is the highest quality cut of beef that you can get without transitioning into Wagyu, of course. I think all of that intermuscular marbling from a prime brisket is really going to help to create a juicy outcome here. So we're looking forward to seeing the end products. Now first, we've just got to actually trim up these guys. Now I'd recommend when you trim these up, 2 points. One, trim them right when you bring them out of the fridge. It's a lot easier to trim off fat from briskets when they're cold, and as you let them warm up to room temperature, you're just more likely to have your knife slip and cut and hurt yourself. Secondly, make sure you're using a sharp knife. So we're just going to use our honing rod here a couple times. Great, we've got that nice and sharp. Now we're just using a little chef's knife here. What I'd highly recommend you use is actually a boning knife, and I'll show you an image of a boning knife here on the screen. We forgot ours back in the city, so I'm making do with what we've got. Using a chef's knife, it's totally fine. It's just a little bit easier if you've got a boning knife. All right, so now let's cut into these. If you slice open the top like this, you should be able to slide your brisket out without losing all of that blood. Now these ones aren't too bad, but sometimes you'll have a lot of the hemoglobin there just build up. So it's nice to actually be thoughtful in how you open these up so that that doesn't go everywhere. All right, so we're first gonna start with the fat cap side. What we're looking to do is trim off any excess fat so we're left with about a 1/4 inch thick worth of fat. So these ones are actually pretty good. So while we're also trimming the fat, we're gonna be looking for flaps that are gonna burn in the smoker as well, like this. And we're just gonna take this excess off here. While this is good meat and we'll use it for burger chuck later, this is just gonna burn off in our brisket. We want a little more rounded edges as opposed to that point there at the end. So we'll start rounding these. Nice, just like that. And now here, we're into some really thick white fat. And what we're trying to do by carving away this fat is just making sure that we're left with a brisket that has some fat content that will actually fully render or leave a little bit of fat on the surface of the brisket just to add to the flavor profile. But what you don't want is a brisket once it's done to have these huge white chunks of fat, because nobody's going to want to eat that. Yeah, and these briskets are pretty good. I don't think they're actually going to require that much trimming. All right, now down this end, usually this end of the brisket is oxidized from when they left the carcass of the steer out in the beef processing plant. This one doesn't look too bad, but we're still going to just make a nice straight edge here down the side. See a lot of fat in there. And then we'll get in here as well. Continue that cut down the side. So that's pretty well done. So now we're gonna flip this over and you can see this really thick white fat part. This is called the decal. So we're gonna wanna trim out a whole bunch of this. This fat isn't gonna render down. And again, nobody's gonna wanna bite into this when they take a slice of brisket. So this is where it helps to have the boning knife, if you've got it. The decal goes way down in here, so if you've got a boning knife, it's just a little bit easier to dig down in there and just carve out that whole decal, but we'll make do again with the chef's knife. Now with this silver skin, we're just gonna take a little bit of this off. We're not doing any kind of competition trim here or competition prep, so this isn't a big deal. All right, so that's our fully trimmed brisket. When you're doing your briskets, plan on long cooks. So we've got 10 pounders here, which are on the smaller side of briskets, but you want to start early in the morning. It's 6 in the morning. We've got a cup of coffee. This is our most important ingredient in this whole cook. I can't tell you how many retakes we've already done this morning. My brain's not even working. So now we're gonna fire up the pellet grill. While that's warming up, we're gonna trim out our second brisket and get both of these ready for seasoning. So we've got the pellet smoker out here. And again, we're gonna be turning this to 225. That's the temp that we're gonna be running our cook at today. Now, when you open this up, briskets are really fatty. So there's gonna be a lot of fat that renders down. Just make sure you've got relatively clean aluminum foil covering your grease traps so that you'll get a nice even flow of grease into the ultimate grease trap of your pellet grill. Now for the pellets, we've got the hopper loaded up. Because these are long cooks, you want this nice and full. We're using a maple bourbon pellet here. Just look at these guys. So we've got another bag. We'll probably add to this halfway through the cook. Thankfully, this grill has a little sensor that'll tell us when the pellet hopper is low, but that's a good amount just for us to start off here. Now, who says pellet grills don't give off enough smoke? Just look at this. Now we gotta season these guys. So we're gonna be going in with some coarse ground black pepper. We just use the Kirkland brand. This is really good from our perspective. And then we use the Diamond Crystal kosher salt. So we're gonna go in with a 50-50 mix of salt and pepper. Now there's no real science to the amount that you use here. We're just going to our personal taste. And that's something that you should work on and just dial in yourselves, depending on your salt sensitivity or however you like your briskets. So we're just gonna mix this up. Perfect. Now if you've got a shaker, you can go in with a shaker with this, but we're just gonna sprinkle it on from up high so that it coats the brisket nice and evenly. Now, the theory with coarse ground black pepper, at least according to Aaron Franklin, is that it helps capture a little bit more of the smoke flavor as your smoke's traveling over your protein. Now we'll see whether that actually makes a difference. Frankly, I haven't noticed it, but I'm not gonna argue with a guy who cooks 110 briskets a day. All right, we'll get that patted down into the brisket, flip it over, do the other side. Now we're gonna save a little bit for the edges here. We wanna make sure we get the edges of these briskets seasoned up. We just usually sprinkle the seasoning onto your hand and then pat it in. That's the easiest way that we've found to do it. Now we'll get a little bit more on the edges here, just sopping up some of that excess seasoning that hit our cutting board. And now we've got 2 seasoned up briskets just waiting for the grill. Let's get these guys on. So this guy, we're gonna be doing fat cap up. So we'll set them up on this side of the grill, fat cap up. This guy, we're gonna be doing fat cap down. So it's really important when you're putting your briskets onto your pellet grill that you make sure they're over top of the actual grease traps that will funnel the grease away and into the main trap of the grill. You don't want any grease to drop down into the fire pot area because that's how you can create a grease fire. Now we're just gonna get our temp probes, and it's pretty handy. We've just got them stored away in here. Now we'll just get our probes connected in here to our smoker. Now we're gonna put this into one of the thinner parts of the flat. Just go in here like that. We'll do the same with the other brisket. Perfect. And we'll close down our lid. So we're just gonna let our grill come back up to temp here. We're at 200, we lost a lot of heat with the lid open. It's set to 250, so it'll come back to that temp pretty quickly. But you'll see we've got a 45 and a 50-degree reading in the 2 flats where we stuck the probe. So we can just connect via Bluetooth and just monitor these. What we're looking for is just getting through the stall, and then we'll come back out here and wrap these briskets. My sense, given the size of these, is it's going to be fairly quick, probably a 4-hour point to get through the stall here. So now we're just going to make our apple cider vinegar spritz here, and we're just going to use a regular little spray bottle, nothing special about that. We've got some apple cider vinegar, and we're just going to go in 1 part apple cider vinegar, 1 part regular water. So we're just going to dilute it a little bit. All right, now we'll add in an equal amount of water, and this is just rough, it doesn't have to be precise. Perfect. Now this is what we're going to spritz the briskets with about every 45 to 60 minutes throughout our cook, and just make sure that they're really nice and juicy at the end of the cook. Anything you can do to prevent your briskets from drying out is a worthwhile endeavor while you've got your briskets on the pellet grill. So with all of this done, it's 7:15, so that took us a little over an hour to trim the briskets, season the briskets, get the pellet grill heated up to temp, and get our diluted apple cider vinegar in place. So again, you want to be starting early, and you want to be factoring in about an hour of time at the start, and we'll be resting these briskets at the end for 60 to 90 minutes in a cooler. So it's not just about the hour cook time per pound, but you've got a decent amount of time on each end in order to get these briskets into the shape where you can start carving it out. So now that we've got all that prep work done, we're just gonna head down to the lake, finish off our morning coffee, and enjoy some of the calm waters down there and just listen to the birds. So we've just been spritzing the briskets every 45 minutes to 60 minutes here, and we're getting a nice little smoke profile here. You can see the mahogany on the brisket, and we're just spraying it gently like this, just to make sure we keep a nice amount of moisture within our briskets and they don't dry out. Now what we're looking for is a temperature in the flat of about 170 degrees. So once we get to that 160, 165 degree temperature, we're gonna hit what's called the stall. What the stall is the point where all of the moisture, or a lot of the moisture within the brisket, starts to evaporate. And so all of the energy that you're putting into the brisket is going into that evaporation process. And so you can have your temperature consistently rising until you hit the stall, and it'll hang there. Sometimes the stall lasts 45 minutes, an hour, but once you come out of that stall, and that's usually around a temp of 175 or 170, that's where we're gonna take the briskets off the grill, we'll wrap them in butcher's paper, and then finish off this cook. See, we're right in the stall. The temperature on both of the probes has narrowed, and we're at 163 in the flats on both of the briskets. We've been here for probably about 20 minutes at this point, so all the energy is just going into evaporating some of the moisture within the briskets, and then we'll come out of that stall and we'll wrap these at 170. So we've just exceeded an internal temp of 170 on this brisket here, which was the fat cat up. The actual smaller, slightly smaller brisket still at 166, reading an internal there on its flat. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna transfer over this one, get it wrapped up in butcher's paper, and then we'll do the same for this one once it hits 170, and then we're in the final stages of this cook. We're just using regular pink butcher's paper here. So what we're gonna do is cut 2 sheets just like that, and then we'll put the other one with a little bit of an overlap, and this is just going to make sure that our butcher's paper has enough thickness for the brisket all the way across. All right, we'll just place that here for a second, then we'll get our brisket. All right, now we're up north. I forgot my regular heat resistant gloves at home, so we're using these bad boys. Just gonna take out our temp probe here. Just look at this guy. We've got a little bit of juice just here on the flat. You can see pooling. This is taking some nice shape here. You can already see that it's got a good wiggle to it. And now we'll get it down here. It's a little windy, so we're trying to keep everything from blowing away. Now, what you're gonna wanna do is just roll it up like this. Roll it over again, roll in the sides, it over one more time, just like that. All right, we'll get this guy back on the grill. Now we'll take our temp probe, get this back in the flat. And we want this to go back in roughly the same place that we had it before. We had a reading of 172 when we took this off. So we'll just make sure that our temp probe is around 172 once this gets settled in there, and we'll know that we're directionally back in the same part of the flat. All right, now we're gonna get our other brisket off here and wrapped. So we'll just go prep the butcher's paper. All right, now we've got the second brisket that we're gonna wrap. Look at the bark on this guy. This is just a beautiful, beautiful mahogany color. Look at that. It's got a nice bend to it already. Smoke profile on this one is gonna be incredible. All right, let's get this over and wrap it up. We just come over the top like this. Pull the brisket in, get it nice and tight. And we come in on the edges. Wrap one more time. Beauty, just like that. Now we've got the fat cap side down on this one. So now we'll get this back on the grill. We were reading 165 previously on this guy. So again, we're just gonna wanna make sure our temp probe has a similar temperature reading so that we know we're in a similar place on the flat. There, just hit 164, 163. So we know we're in a very similar spot on the flat. Now we'll just close down this lid and we'll let this continue going. Let's check in on our pellets. And you can see we've used a decent amount of these pellets already. And right now it's about 11:30. So we're 4.5 hours into our cook. So we're just gonna take some more of these Cuisinart maple bourbon pellets here. Perfect, with that done, we know we'll have loads of pellets for the rest of our cook. We're gonna leave the briskets in the butcher's paper here for the rest of this cook until we hit an internal temp of somewhere between 198 to 203 Fahrenheit. And around that 195 degree temperature mark, we're gonna start testing these briskets for feel, so you'll be able to tell whether your brisket's actually done. The other way of telling is just whether they're probe tender. So we'll take our thermopen and we'll be able to just probe into the briskets and make sure that they're probe tender, and we'll figure out exactly what final temp to pull these briskets at. All right, so we're just gonna do a quick check here on our briskets just to see if they're probe tender. So again, we've just got our temp probe. Yeah, there's practically no resistance when you're sticking this probe in. So now we're gonna do our feel test. We're just gonna pick this guy up. Oh yeah, look at all that juice. All right, so we're just gonna wiggle it around like that, and you can feel this is the right amount of firmness that we're looking for. So let's get this transferred over to the cutting board. We'll get our other brisket moved into the center of the grill. Get that closed up. This probably has another half an hour to go. So in the meantime, let's get over here. So just look at this brisket. You can see all of the fats rendered out here, and it's really just melted right through the butcher's paper. This is wonderful. You can smell just a beautiful bark, all that wood flavor from the smokiness that's coming off of this. So now what we're gonna do is transfer this to a cooler, or if you don't have a cooler, you can just stick it in your oven, and we're gonna let this rest for between 60 to 90 minutes. And we'll get the other one into the oven as well, or into the cooler once it's finished, and we'll let them both rest for an equivalent amount of time, and then we'll carve into them. All right, now our second brisket's reading 198, so we're just gonna check if it's probe tender. So we'll go in, practically no resistance here in the point, so that's perfect. We're gonna get this off the grill, we'll do the bend test, and see if this is ready to put in the oven. All right, look at that. Look at this, we've got a nice bend, a little bit of juice flowing, and this is the time I'm glad I actually have plastic gloves and not the normal cloth gloves, frankly. All right, we're gonna move this over to the cutting board. All right, we've got our 2 briskets out of the oven, and you can see the juices have just soaked all the way through this butcher's paper. We didn't get quite as much soaking on the top here, but of course this is our fat cap down brisket, so that might not be all that much of a surprise. So now let's open these guys up. Just look at the juice in that butcher's paper. That is absolutely incredible. That is one moist brisket. Now, we're gonna open the one that was fat cap down the entire time. Similar level of moistness here on the bottom of the brisket. Oh my gosh, look at that. That is a stunner. Look at that smoke color that you've got here. So now let's just check out the barks. And there's the fat cap side. Just beautiful, such a rich mahogany smoke color on the top there. Let's check this guy out. That's the fat cap side. And on the other side, you know what, maybe a little less color and bark, but that's just because, of course, we had the bark just sitting in the pool of juices at the base. That is absolutely beautiful. Okay, now we're gonna carve into these guys and check out the difference. Okay, so the most important part about slicing into the brisket is having a good brisket carver. Now these are super cheap. I'll leave a link down in the description below on Amazon, but they're a serrated edge, so it really carves through these briskets nicely without actually tearing or your slices of brisket that you're trying to make. So I'd highly recommend investing in one of these guys. Now we've got the flat over here, we've got the point up here. Now what we're gonna do, we're gonna go a little more than about halfway through the brisket, and then we'll carve in here. And just look at that. Beautiful. This is the marbled piece of brisket here, and just look. Now you shouldn't be squeezing your brisket, but if you do, all of that fat, the decal that goes between the flat and the point, that should have rendered down, and it just creates this incredible waterfall. First sign is this brisket is super juicy, so that's a great outcome. Now what you want to do is just take off a little piece on the outside here, and so that's just so that we can start actually getting some proper brisket slices. Slices that are about a pencil width thick. That's just what we're doing here, and you can see how the serrated edge really helps with this. Great. Now, to carve up the point, you're actually going to want to turn it horizontally. And there. This is the money muscle shot right there. Just look at all that rendering. Beautiful. So now with this guy, we're just going to do the same thing. After turning it 90 degrees, we're just going to carve it up about a pencil inch thick. You might need to go a little bit thicker on these guys just because it's a moister meat here. Now let's cut into the next brisket. Delilah, no, you stay away, Delilah. We'll give you a piece at the end, okay? Now we're gonna prep this the same way. First, we're gonna cut in about 2/3 the way down the brisket. Just look at that. You can see all that rendering. This is really nice. There was a little more fat on this point than there was on the other one. Now we'll just carve this up. We'll cut off the tip here, just like that, set that aside. Now what you can actually do is just carve it in like this. And these are nice bite-sized morsels, so maybe we'll give one of these to Delilah. Hey Delilah, here, come here. Do you like that? And it's gone. So now we'll just finish carving into this. Just look at that. Beautiful. Incredibly juicy. This is just gleaning with juice here. Absolutely amazing. All right, now we're gonna compare the smoke ring between the briskets. Now if you look at this guy, we've got a really nice dark smoke ring all the way around. Not on the fat cap, but that's not what you'd expect for the fat cap. Now let's check the other guy here. Oh my God, this is just so juicy. And we've got a pretty good smoke ring, maybe a little bit less, but not that bad. So overall, I don't think having the fat cap pointed up or down is really going to impact the level of smoke ring that you get, which should be indicative of the smoke flavor. Next, we're going to do the bend test. Now the bend test is just hanging slices of the flat over top of your fingers like this, and they should be able to bend down each side of your finger, but not actually break. You can see on this one, it's maybe pulling apart a little bit. Similar on this side, but you know, we can bounce these up and down and we're still not losing the brisket, so that's perfect. What you want to be able to do is just pull your brisket apart like this without too much tension. Had a little bit of resistance there. That might just be because I sliced it a little thick. This one just pulls apart. Look at that. Now we're coming down ultimately to the taste test. We'll see if it makes a difference from a taste perspective. So I'm gonna get a piece of the flat, nice and juiced up with all the renderings here. Okay, we'll do that on each side. Actually, I'm going to take that one because it's got a little bit more fat. And then I'm gonna take a piece of the point from both briskets. So let's get this guy out here, slice that off. All right, now we're gonna grade the flat. This one is from the brisket that had the fat cap side down. That maple bourbon, you can really taste that coming through. What a great piece of brisket. Now I'm gonna try the next one. Oh, that little bit of fat cap just melts in your mouth. Absolutely delicious. You know, I'm gonna give the juicier brisket to the one where the fat cap was pointed up. I know the heat source on a pellet grill is coming up from the bottom, but I think there's enough distribution in the airflow that it certainly didn't impact the juiciness on this cook. Now we're gonna go in for the point. Look at that. Just look at the rendering. We've got all that fat in between the muscular tissue here. This is gonna be an absolutely mouth-watering bite. You can taste the salt, you can taste the pepper, you can taste the maple bourbon. This is just so, so good. This is what barbecue's all about. Taking a muscle that's really tough, that does a ton of work on the steer, and then just through time, a little bit of heat, and some love, you break down all that intermuscular tissue, you render the fattiness of the cut throughout, and you just get a really juicy outcome in the end. That's incredible. Okay, now for our last bite, and then we'll declare a winner, I promise. That might have been the best bite of brisket that I've had in a long, long time. That I've made personally, of course. Really, really tender. A little bit less fat in that one than this brisket here. All of the intermuscular tissue had been broken down. Okay, so here's how I'm coming down on this one. I'm gonna say that the bark on the fat cap down brisket actually was a little bit better. And that's because smoke got to adhere to the top of the brisket throughout the entire cook. And when we wrapped this back up, the fat cap had all of the renderings just sitting on the fat cap side. So that didn't eat away at the quality of the crust. Versus the fat cap up, as we wrap this and then put it in the smoker for another couple of hours, it actually, the crust sat in the rendering. All that bark that we had worked so hard to build up just got whipped away because of that rendering. Now it's super tender, but if you're just looking at appearance and the crispiness and crunch of the bark, we didn't quite get it on this brisket. Otherwise, I think the smoke rings were pretty similar. The flavor profiles were pretty similar. I'd say this brisket was probably a little more well done in the sense that the point had actually fully rendered down versus this one. That might have just been the difference in the actual cut itself. I wouldn't attribute that to the fat cap being on the top or the bottom. But anyway, both of these were fabulous outcomes. And if you cooked a brisket one way versus the other, I'd still be eating it. So the difference is fairly marginal, but if you want a better bark and really give that wow factor at your barbecue, I'd definitely head in that direction. Now we got to take this inside and feed the family. So if you like this video, consider subscribing to the channel. We've got a whole bunch of additional brisket experiments to come where we're going to test out different myths of cooking and smoking brisket and see which ones actually matter. Thanks for tuning in. Hey Delilah. Stay. Okay. And Delilah likes the brisket.